It looked like something designed for the future. A needle-sharp nose, tiny wings, titanium construction, and a name that fitted perfectly: the Stiletto. The Douglas X-3 was supposed to cruise at twice the speed of sound. There was just one problem. In level flight, it couldn't even reach Mach 1. And somehow, that failure would help solve a deadly problem nobody saw coming. Most stories have another side. This one's just a little stranger. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. Imagine standing on a dry lake bed in California in the early 1950s and seeing this airplane for the first time. Even today, the Douglas X-3 Stiletto looks fast, sitting still. It was nearly 67 feet long, but its wings stretched only about 22 feet from tip to tip. Add that impossibly long nose, a bright white finish, and a cockpit buried near the middle of the airplane, and the X-3 looked more like somebody's idea of a spaceship than a conventional research aircraft. And that appearance wasn't accidental. The X-3 was designed to investigate sustained flight at around Mach 2. Unlike the rocket-powered Bell X-1, which was carried aloft beneath another aircraft, the X-3 was supposed to operate like a normal airplane, take off under its own power, climb to altitude, spend extended periods at supersonic speed, and then come home and land. At least, that was the plan. Douglas designed an extremely slender airframe with tiny, low aspect ratio wings and made extensive use of titanium, which was still an exotic and difficult material to work with. The airplane was also designed around two Westinghouse J-46 turbojet engines, and that's where things began going wrong. Development problems with the J-46 meant the engines intended for the X-3 weren't available, so the airplane ended up with two considerably less powerful Westinghouse J-34s. The Stiletto had been designed around Mach 2 performance. Now, it didn't have the thrust to get it there. In fact, it couldn't even break the sound barrier in level flight. To get the X-3 supersonic, pilots had to climb to altitude and put the airplane into a dive, eventually pushing it to a little over Mach 1.2. Once the nose came back up, that speed disappeared quickly. But lack of power was only part of the problem. Those tiny wings that looked so impressive at high speeds weren't nearly as happy when the airplane was close to the ground. Takeoffs were long and fast. Landings were equally demanding. And that created another unexpected problem: tires. At the speeds required by the X-3, conventional aircraft tires could overheat and shed their tread. The solution was wonderfully simple: get rid of the tread. Special high-pressure tires were developed for the X-3, and the tread was shaved away, leaving a thin, smooth layer of rubber. Essentially, the Stiletto was flying on purpose-built, bald tires. And because those tires weren't something you wanted to waste rolling around on concrete, the X-3 was often transported on a special trailer instead of casually taxiing around the base. For an airplane that looked this futuristic, some of its operating procedures were surprisingly practical. Getting into it was another story. The X-3 used a downward-firing ejection seat. On the ground, the seat could actually be lowered beneath the airplane. The pilot strapped himself in, and the entire seat was electrically raised through the bottom of the fuselage into the cockpit. Basically, the X-3 came with its own pilot elevator. Once inside, however, things became considerably less entertaining. Visibility was limited, and the airplane could be unforgiving. Test pilot Frank Everest later described the X-3 as one of the most difficult airplanes he had ever flown. Considering the airplanes Frank Everest flew during his career, that's saying something. But the X-3's most important contribution wouldn't come from its engines, its titanium construction, or even those tiny wings. It came from one particularly unpleasant flight. On October 27, 1954, NACA research pilot Joseph Walker was flying the X-3 during a series of stability tests. At around 30,000 feet in Mach 0.92, Walker made an abrupt roll. Instead of simply rolling around its horizontal axis, the X-3 suddenly pitched and yawed at the same time. The airplane began gyrating violently. Walker recovered. That alone would have been enough excitement for most people. Yeah, including myself. But this was a research flight, so Walker climbed again, put the X-3 into a dive, accelerated to Mach 1.154, and did it again. This time, the reaction was even worse. The X-3 pitched violently downward, reaching about negative 6.7 Gs, then snapping in the opposite direction to roughly positive 7 Gs. Walker managed to recover again and brought the airplane safely home. When engineers examined the data, They realized the X3 had reached its structural load limits. They had also captured extraordinarily valuable information about a phenomenon called inertia coupling. As jet fighters became faster and their fuselages grew heavier relative to their thin wings, a rapid roll could produce unexpected pitching and yawing forces. And this wasn't just an interesting aerodynamic theory. It was becoming a very real problem. Early supersonic fighters, including the F-100 Super Sabre, were encountering dangerous stability problems. North American test pilot George Welch had already been killed during an F-100 accident in 1954. The X3 gave researchers something they desperately needed: instrumented flight data showing what happened when these forces took over. The airplane that couldn't perform the Mach 2 research it had been built for had accidentally become extremely useful for studying something else. And its influence didn't stop there. Take a look at the X3, and then look at the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. The resemblance is hard to miss. Long fuselage, extremely small thin wings, landing gear contained within the fuselage. Early F-104s even used a downward firing ejection seat. Lockheed studied information developed during the X3 program while designing its new fighter. But the Starfighter had something the Stiletto desperately needed: power. Its General Electric J79 gave the F-104 the performance that the X3 designers had originally been chasing. The Douglas X-3 flew only a few dozen times before its research career ended in 1956. It never reached Mach 2. It never even came close. But calling it simply a failure misses the more interesting part of the story. The X3 helped engineers understand titanium construction, extremely high-speed takeoff and landing requirements, specialized tires, and, most importantly, the dangerous stability problems appearing as aircraft pushed deeper into the supersonic era. Today, the only X3 ever completed survives at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. And more than 70 years after it first flew, it still looks remarkably futuristic. Maybe that's the most fitting thing about the Stiletto. It was designed to explore a future it wasn't powerful enough to reach. But the lessons it taught helped the airplanes that followed get there. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.